Back in 2024, I went from my lowest grade ever, a 37%, to the top 4% of all first-year psychology students while only studying 2 hours a day. If you don't know who I am, my name is Katkov. I'm the founder of UofTearless, and today is a big day because I'm going to be teaching you exactly how I did it in a series of videos that explains what I call the 2-hour method. My goal is to help students get out of the classroom so they can spend more time actually enjoying their university experience. In this series, I'll walk you through everything: the setup, the structure, the theory, the process. This is going to be the most valuable course that you ever watch, so subscribe because you don't want to miss it. In this video, I'll cover exactly what the 2-hour method is, why it works, and how it worked to help me memorize absurd amounts of content faster than you ever thought possible. The 2-hour method is a study system that I developed to drastically reduce the amount of time that I spent studying by increasing the amount that I learn within the hours that I spend studying. The title's pretty self-explanatory. I call it the 2-hour method because it allows me to study no more than 2 hours a day and still breeze through all of my exams. I'm a third year in university, and what I found over the past 3 years is that if I study 25 minutes a day per class, I will never fall behind and I will never have to cram for exams. Sounds pretty nice, right? So how does this method truly work? Well, to truly understand how this method works and everything that I'm about to lay out for you, you first need to understand how memory works in general. And I could go very in depth on this, but I'm just going to keep it simple because you probably care more about how to actually do it. Now, there are two things that you need to know. The first are the types of memories that exist, and the second is how the brain utilizes them. And there are many types of memory, but for now we only really care about two, and that is short-term memory and long-term memory. Short-term memory is the brief storage of information in your brain, and long-term memory is pretty much everything else that wasn't taken in the last minute or so. Anytime you remember an event or a person or literally anything that you've memorized, that's long-term memory. So to get something into short-term memory, all you need to do is give it attention. Now, getting information into long-term memory is a little bit more complicated and requires something known as elaborative rehearsal. And elaborative rehearsal is the process by which you connect new information to pre-existing information that you already know. Think of it like building a house where if you have a weak foundation, you're not going to be able to build much on top of it. This is why the more you learn, the easier it becomes to learn more, because there's more information that already exists to connect new information to. And this whole process of getting something from short-term memory to long-term memory is known as encoding. And after encoding all this information, your brain stores it in what's known as the storage phase. Once information is in storage phase, it pretty much stays there until you need it. And when you want to get it out of long-term memory, you go through what's known as the retrieval process. And this brings information back into conscious attention. Once something is in long-term memory, recalling it is pretty easy. The problem is in getting it there. And it's because elaborative rehearsal requires a lot of energy and attention. And this is why studying this way feels hard, because if you don't study with purpose, it is extremely difficult to make any progress in your studying. So to summarize, there are two types of memory. There's short-term memory and long-term memory. To get something into short-term memory requires attention. To get something from short-term memory to long-term memory requires elaborative rehearsal. And the more you know, the easier it is to connect stuff to that. And the two ways that you can increase your rate of learning is by more connections from short-term memory to long-term memory stuff, or by increasing the frequency of encoding, which, remember again, is the process of getting something from short-term memory to long-term memory. So that's memory. Now, how does the method actually leverage this process? I define a shortcut by anything that helps you achieve the same amount in less time or more in the same amount of time. Now, I love flashcards and I make them like my life depends on them. And I found a way to save a lot of time by using a free software called Anki. Now let me preface by saying that Anki is just a tool, not this special sauce that makes this method so valuable. Think of like a master chess player versus a novice chess player. They're both using the same pieces with the same amount of squares on the board. It's just one is using them way better than the other. The method is not the tool itself, it's how you use the tool that makes it extremely powerful. And so in these videos, it's my goal to show you everything I've learned from all the experience that I've gathered over the past 3 years, and hopefully save you a shit ton of time in the process. So Anki is a free software that you can download on any computer that I use to make all of my digital flashcards. And when you use Anki, you'll realize that it's pretty much as close as you can get to downloading information into your brain. Now, the two variables that you need to optimize for memory are the frequency of review and the quality of questions that you ask. Now, Anki uses a method called spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is a type of review that's characterized by increasing the interval of time that you see information after you get it correct. And so every time you study it and you get it right, you're going to see it less frequently. Every time you get it wrong, you'll see it more frequently. And so Anki has an algorithm that actually does all this for you, so you don't even need to think about it, to implement spaced repetition into your studying. And Anki's intervals pretty much work that if you get it right, it'll show you in 10 minutes, and if you get it right again, it'll show you the next day, and then in 3 days, and then I think it's like 5 days and 7 days or something like that. And if you get it wrong, it will show you again in 1 minute. No matter how many times you've gotten it right, it will always go back to 1 minute so that you cannot forget everything that you've learned. And it makes it almost impossible to fail. Now this brings me to the quality of the questions that you're studying, because you can't just use Anki's algorithm and expect it to work. It will work better for sure, but it won't necessarily give you the best results. Spaced repetition works best when you combine it with what's known as active recall. Active recall is when you derive information yourself without a cue, and a cue is essentially a hint. This is what's known as free recall. And free recall is the best way to know whether you know the information or not, because you either get it right or you don't. If you can partially recall something, that is the tip of the tongue phenomenon, and that does not count as a correct answer. You need to get the whole thing right, and you need to get it right frequently. That is how you know that you've mastered a concept. And that is how I use Anki to ensure that I've memorized everything in all of my courses. And trust me, when you start doing this, you will realize just how powerful Anki truly is, because you'll learn so much faster than traditional study methods. And just so we're clear on what those other study methods are, let me know if this sounds familiar. Rereading lecture slides, rewatching lecture videos, annotating the textbook, and rewriting your notes. All of these 4 things are very passive ways of learning. It's very easy for it not to be encoded because all you have to do is give it your attention, but you're not actively making those connections to things you already know. When I'm trying to remember something, let's say if it was like the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. If I need to know what the mitochondria is, I'm like, okay, it's probably a thing in a cell. Well, I know what a cell is. So it's the powerhouse of that thing. Okay, so it's probably like the engine. Okay, well the engine is what makes the car go. And so the mitochondria is probably what makes the cell go. And so you see how I connected that new information to something that I already learned. If I haven't connected it to something that is stable, those memories are just kind of going around right in your short-term memory until they fade away. How many times have you read a paragraph and then just not understood what it said? That's probably because you weren't actively engaged with the material. Now, these study methods aren't bad, it's just that they're not complete, because it is a way to consolidate information, except you also have to study it. You cannot just make the information ready to study. And so you need to study the way that you're going to be tested. You're tested on how well you actually know the material when you can conjure it up from free recall. And another concept that I find extremely helpful whenever I make my flashcards is that I want to make encoding, the process of putting something from the outside world into my long-term memory, very easy. And then you can get fancy, challenge yourself with the recall aspect of it. But it needs to be there first. A lot of people don't actually get it there, and then they try to do all this fancy stuff when there's nothing to recall, because they never got it to long-term memory. So this was a very general overview of the method, and I told you exactly what to do. Now we're going to go into how to do it.